Hello and welcome to the episode 2 of Right in the Middle podcast. I'm Marcelo. This is my friend Zubair, and this day it's a quite funny because he will try to convince me that low-code tools is good. So
Yeah, I will.
Do you want to do some introductions?
Well, it might make sense to first say a little bit about us. So, my name is Zubair, as he said, and I'm a middleware architect at Red Hat. And
Well, I'm a consultant, a middleware consultant, and by the way, it's not that I don't like low-code tools, just because I'm a too technical guy, so I just love to dig into something. But it's fun to remember because actually, I think I did some work with low-code tools in the past, and maybe that's why I tend to not enjoy it too much.
maybe we should take a step back. When you hear the word, or the two words, low code, what do you think it means? Because everyone has a different definition.
Ah, yes. And probably because there is no code tool and a low code tool. Is there any metric you need to do, like the amount of code you put into it low code tool? And if it's more than an X amount of code, it's not a low
Okay,
code
so
tool?
here's how I think about it. I think that low code and no code are just marketing terms, because I actually think Java is low code. Because when I started, I was doing assembly language, C, C++, machine code. And so suddenly, as we go up in abstraction, like when I first saw Java after doing C++ and like having to use pointers and all of that stuff for years, when I saw Java, I was like, oh wow, this is developing without code. So I thought Java was a low code tool.
Yes, that's good because it's all related to how you see the things. Like if you're, like for example, you're drinking your water now. So in a local tool, I can just tell the computer to drink water. In assembly language, no, just raise your hand and just grab the bottle of water
Yeah.
and raise it a little bit. So it's more like how you're comparing those tools, and maybe for an enterprise scenario, I can see your point. Actually, that reminds me of BPM solution. I used to work a lot with BPM, and BPM sounds like a low-code tool. Not entirely no-code tool, because you still need to design some stuff like the forms, and from that perspective, maybe BPM is a low-code tool.
Well, I mean, one of the products that we have in the company that I work at is this process automation manager, and it uses BPM, and it's supposed to be this thing where you can draw diagrams and show the flow of things, and it's very similar to another tool I used to use, which is Apex. And do you know Apex?
It rings a bell, but I'm not sure if I remember what's...
Well, there's Salesforce Apex and Oracle Apex, which is built on top of the database.
No, yeah.
Which one have you used? Or
Yeah, because I used to work with Oracle BPM back in the days of, maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And the thing is, for me, working with BPM in a local tool, it allowed me to get more close to the business guys. So I don't need to like convert the stuff to BPM. For example, when I was using Beeple. Beeple is like it's a local tool,
yeah,
but it's in the sense of you don't need to write code.
that was an earlier version of BPMS. That was a business process execution
Beeple,
language.
Yes, Beeple was like a way of describing an algorithm, but using diagrams.
Yeah.
The thing is, if you show up a Beeple diagram to a business analyst, he would just look and say, "Whoa, what the hell is this? I don't know what you're talking about."
Yeah,
Because
that's correct.
those are related to technology and not to business. And when they actually start to use BPM, it's still a local tool, but it talks with the business guys, because now it's an abstraction that is used. It's easy to show business people, what you're trying to solve. Your BPM process now, it talks more with business analyst, then a BPU process. And then when I
So
started
sorry,
to work,
take a step back on this. So,
Yeah.
so maybe we need a bit of history here about BPEL and BPM and OMG,
OMG.
the Object Management Group, who BPMN.
Ah, okay, that I
Yeah.
didn't know. I thought it was, oh my God, but
Okay.
but that one I didn't know. If you want to,
Yeah.
if you want to start with that.
So basically, so OMG, they're defining a lot of these standards and related to object-oriented stuff and distributed objects and things like that. And I think Corba as well. And one of the things that came out of OMG is this BPM. There's so many acronyms that I get confused. BPMN, and I think with Red Hat's products, it's BPMN2 now.
Yes,
And
because
so it's not just our products, but it's a modeling format that developers and business people can both agree on, and it works with other companies' products as well. Does that make sense?
yes, it makes sense. And we used to use some other notations, even if it was open source, but it wasn't the key here. It's standards, and standards that are widely used by enterprise. So BPMN, it's a notation widely used, and you can easily find people who knows what's a BPMN notation. But if you take back in the days with JBPM using the
That was from
JPDL.
JBoss.
Yes, the JPDL notation. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was good, but it wasn't a industry standard. So they had to adopt the BPMN notation. It's if you think about an enterprise, it's you need to go for standards because you need to hire people, and that maybe now that you're talking with me, I can rephrase that. It's not that I don't like local tools. Actually, local tools can be great, but you really need to adopt standards, because if you're not using standards, you're like in the middle of something that only you can understand.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's the point. Is you have to say, why use low-code tools?
Yes.
Is it just because it's a buzzword, or is it because you can have developers and business people kind of talk the same language, or is it because a company has had an IT project which is a total disaster and they want to try something different? I mean, these are why do it? I mean, for me, I think most companies, they see developers doing stuff, and basically to companies it's like this black box. It's like you put money in and nothing comes out.
Well, that really rings a bell to me. But that's a good point, because if you think you need to make profit of something, so if you're spending too much money on something that doesn't provide you profit, so why? And that reminds me of some RAD tools, rapid application development. Those tools are mostly no-code tools, but some of them are really low-code tools. The problem is, if you're abstracting something and you're putting a higher level of abstraction, you're not exposing some, not basic stuff, but critical stuff, like how you're processing web requests, so you know how to update your front end to not be exposing vulnerabilities. So if you're using a no code or a low code tool, you have to make sure that you're not exposing your customers to some vulnerabilities. So that's
even if you're coding with Java or C++, they're so complex that there's so many security problems there as well. So it's not just with low-code tool. I would say with low-code tools, it's actually harder to mess up because they give you some abstractions and you can't really get out of their box. So to mess up, you have to go away from the formula.
That makes sense. And we go back to the standards and business and enterprise standards. If you're using okay, my uncle, he started to build a local tool, so I should adopt that. Probably not. because
Okay.
you really need to rely on.
So maybe we can do a little test here. I'll say the name of something, and you tell me if you think it's low code or what.
That's good.
Okay, so Python,
Oh, Python.
is that coding?
Yes, it's coding. You can easily use Python to develop some low-code tools. But from my understanding and from my point of view, languages are are not low-code. They're just a way of coding. You can use them to bring stuff with low coding, like DSLs. If you're using Python or Java to develop some DSL, that DSL can easily be low code too, but not the language itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Let me try different. Yeah. Okay. Visual Basic. Do you know it?
Yeah, Visual Basic.
Is that low
it's-
code?
Yeah, it sounds like a low code too because of the drag and drop stuff.
Okay. So Visual C++.
Yeah, Visual C++.
Have you used that much?
Whoa.
Because that's got drag and drop.
Yeah,
That's hardcore C++.
Yes, a long time ago I saw people using that.
So what makes it a low code tool? Is it that you can do GUI stuff easily?
Yeah, if I'm not using GUI stuff, so my local tool is not a drag and drop. It's or it can be a drag and drop. If you take, for example, Camel. If you take Camel, you can easily drag and drop stuff to create your integration flow, and that leads to a low code or even a no code too. But if you start to write something, then you use a DSL, and again you be using a low code tool, and Camel is a great tool. So, but again, it's not about the language; it's about the abstraction you build on top of the language.
So you could do low code in C++.
Yeah, sure. I think you can.
So it's about having a high level of abstraction. Maybe.
Yes, the thing is, you always need to put an abstraction that solves your problem. And if you're opening this abstraction for people like developers use it to solve their problems, you can easily build the local tools. I think you can. But the thing is, from my understanding now, it's like it doesn't have a parameter here, like a X amount of work. It's a low code or no code. It's like it's not science. It's not a math. It's just observation. If you think like you're not getting your hands in everything that is happening on the background, you're using a low code too.
Okay.
If you're not putting your hands under the hood, so you're using a low code tool.
What about Excel?
That's
Because that's the most used development tool on
Wow.
the planet.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a tricky question, man. I don't know. What's your thoughts about Excel?
Well, I would define, I think, low code, it's defined, I think, by the audience. You're right, not by the language. And I think the idea is that you can't just have people who love IT to automate things. You have to start to give that power to business people and to non-technical people. Does that make sense?
Yes, and actually, you say the word automation. I always like this word, and that reminds me of like Ansible or Puppet. Those tools can be easily mapped as low-code tools.
But when you see the amount of code in Ansible, sometimes is a lot of code.
Yes.
So
And if
and the
you-
people are very technical who do it. It's business people don't do Ansible stuff.
Yes,
It's
they don't do.
techies.
Yes, they don't do. It's
So
like,
I wouldn't say that's low code myself.
yeah, but if you think about abstractions, if you design that, actually it's good because Ansible it's like a state machine. If you're using Ansible to put a lot of shell scripts, so things are wrong, you need to design a module. So that module provides you an abstraction to say, hey, this is the state I want for this server here, and this state it's clearly defined here in this YAML file. If you're using that approach, you're using a low code tool. But if you're using Ansible to like spin up some scripts, you're using just shell scripts under the hood. So you're not using a low code tool. Actually, you're using the wrong tool to solve the wrong problem.
I mean, I guess, yeah, so something like Ansible, the people who are making the plugins are the developers or the IT
Yes.
admins, and the people who press the button are the low-code users.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
it's very hard to define low-code, and this is part of the problem
Whoa.
is what is the definition, and it's hard to know what the definition
Yeah.
is.
That reminds me, the only exact science is math. All the rest is not
Yeah.
exact.
And, physicists say
Yes,
that
physicists.
there's nothing except for physics.
Exactly. Wow, that's a good thought. Oh, it makes me.
But do you think did you use any low-code tools like you've used API management stuff, haven't you? Would you say
Yes.
that's a low-code tool? Because
Well,
if you had to code that by hand, that would be a lot of work.
yes, it's a touche for me because an API management, it's like a proxy, a gateway here. It's a proxy that you need to map some inputs to your backend. So you can easily code, but easily code, it's not means that you'll be performant and then it's going to be maintained by years and years. And you really need some low code tools to help you to map those endpoints. So I would say it sounds like a low code tool.
But the thing is, when a business person hears of low code, I think they have this thing in their head where they think, oh, you know what, I can build Facebook using a low code tool.
Yeah, that reminds me of a lot of those blog in 15 minutes back in the days
Yeah.
of Ruby on Rails.
Yeah.
And Ruby on Rails always sounded like a convention over configuration. It's the best way to do stuff. No matter if Ruby on Rails is a good or a bad framework, it's not the subject here. But if you're using conventions over configuration, you're not exposing people to a lot of boilerplate code. If you're coding a lot of stuff without any reason, okay, why I'm doing this? I'll just to connect those dots here, just to tell that that your web server is dead, but is there. But if you're using the conventions, the tool will figure out how to connect.
In
those
that way,
points.
it is low code because you didn't have to, like, if you talk to the database, you had, like in Java, you'd have to write maybe 50 lines of code to do the same thing.
Yes.
There's one finder method.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right. Oh, this is a tough thing to like bring in a concept of low code too. But if you rip it off like a no code or low code or high code, you shouldn't do a lot of coding without reasons because every line of code you write, it's like a potential bug.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you were saying that every line of code is a bug or something.
It's a potential bug. If you're writing code, if you think, for example, if you write a hello world, it doesn't contain any bugs, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe if you, it's not a. It's
It
not
can.
it's not
Actually,
yeah.
there's a lot of places it can fail.
Yeah, that's
why you have about 1 million different implementations of
Yes.
Hello World.
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, the more you code, the more time you need to spend maintaining those codes. So if you're coding a lot of stuff to do nothing valuable to your system, then you really shouldn't do that. Like,
Okay, so, sorry.
no, yeah, it's just a matter of business value.
Well-
If you're spending time coding things that don't add business
Okay,
value,
so-
why you should
So
do that?
this is interesting because we basically have not got a definition of low code, and it's a bit like this term middleware. No one can agree on what middleware is,
Yes.
and why is that?
Yes. That's a good question.
And it might be that automation is in so much a part of everyday life of the world, yet there's this big divide in society between developers and non-developers. And so for people who are not developers, like business people and normal people, they need a way to organize what do developers do in their minds. And that is coding, even though it's only a small part of it. And then for coders, to understand what the rest of the world does, we have to say, okay, they're not coders, but they want to code. They're low coders. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's a way to put people in a box. This whole
Yes. If you, and it's good to think like this, because if you think like an artist he draws a lot. They draw a lot of stuff. But we, as developers, as programmers, we need to write less code. But it's because writing code is just a small part of our.
I agree with
work.
that. I mean, like, I've seen a lot of people in startups and companies, and they show off about how much code they have. And I always say you shouldn't show off, because I see lines of code. Well, I see a software system like an airplane, and I see lines of code as weight in the airplane. I think Bill Gates originally said that.
I don't remember who said that, but it makes sense. If you have a lot of lines of code to maintain, you can easily build something that you can just evolve it to a new technology or to add more business value, because you have a lot of code base.
But here's the problem: is like, you shouldn't build stuff unless you need it. But I mean, you take something like Kubernetes. How many implementations of Kubernetes are there?
Yeah.
Probably hundreds, maybe thousands.
Yeah,
And-
it's like everyone is making their own distribution of Kubernetes.
Like Linux, and like Linux, how many distributions failed? But was there any need for them? No. So was there a value in people spending all that resources to make new versions of Linux or like distributions or new versions of of Kubernetes? So in that way, you're right. It's like we should only be making stuff if there's value, but that's actually tied up into business thinking and maybe open source. Because if you're a company and you see another company has made a product and it's successful, you might build exactly the same thing just so that you can take some market share, and that's got nothing to do with making value for anyone. In fact, it's taking value away.
Yes, that makes sense. And that reminds me of the CSS framework, the Bootstrap.
Oh yeah.
Since Bootstrap arrived, almost all the normal people website, they look like the same, like mine. My website is built on Bootstrap, so it looks like all the other.
Mine too. Yeah.
All the others' website, and we can easily say that Bootstrap it's a low code too. Even if CSS is not coding,
Yeah, okay,
but it's, we can say that Bootstrap it's a low code, low CSS too, and the thing is, you start using those low code tools, and suddenly your software will be like everyone else's software, because you're using the same thing as the base, as the foundation. And
Can you give me an example?
Yes, all our blogs, or if you take to the mobile stuff, like Ionic, and I don't remember all of
There's
those.
a lot of CSS frameworks. There's Balmer. There's
Yes, if you go away from the CSS framework and start to go deeper, like those frameworks to build like web applications that are using just a web view, and if you use that web view using Bootstrap, it's like suddenly all mobile applications look like the same, because they're just a Bootstrap website punched in a web view
but
on your smartphone.
that leads to another thing, because for me, I don't care if the websites all look the same. One of the problems with, I mean, this is in the JavaScript world, is you have so many libraries built on top of each other. Everything ends up so slow. Like, if you look at a web page, I mean, if you look at, like, sometimes to load a normal web page, and it's like 2 megabytes of stuff for what?
Yeah.
And it takes like 5 seconds to load when it could have been 0.001 seconds. And that's because of people trying to use standard frameworks and things like that.
Yeah, it's like back in the days of jQuery, because I think when I started to develop my website, I'm a crappy front-end developer, so I just grabbed the jQuery and Bootstrap and stuff, and I realized after reading a lot of stuff that the jQuery it's not being able to be cached by my web browser, my mobile web browser. So every time I make a request, it will download the jQuery and we evolve that. But if we use small pieces of JavaScript, then your web browser can make a cache, and you don't need to get it anymore. And suddenly, if the thing is, every time one of the most common used argument for using low-code tools is you can get people that know just a bit of programming to make something. Like for example, you don't need to hire skilled people to develop your software because you're using a low-code tool, and that gives
they're skilled but not skilled in software development.
exactly that gives more power to people that don't have skills to build something. But turns out if you don't know how things are going inside of your local tool of your software, then you don't have any perspectives of how you're going to solve some problems that might arrive after your product hits the market. Like for example, some scalability issues we have with a lot of startups.
Yeah, but you can throw money at those problems.
Yes.
I mean, that's why startups generally don't. They just build it to get it out as fast as they can.
Yes, the MVP.
Yeah.
Yes, the thing is, your MVP, can your MVP hit the market and be like strong enough to survive the load?
No, well, I think the problem is actually that the harder problem is, do people even care? Because I've seen so many companies. I mean, I think at least 50% of startups, they spend 10 times, maybe 100 times sometimes longer building their product than they should, because they think they're going to have scalability problems. And then when they go live, they they press the button, the site goes live, and then they say, oh, there must be a problem. And you say, why? They say, because no one's going to the website. Except for someone's mother and brothers and sisters and friends who they forced to go there.
Hey, go there, please.
And then they realized the problem was not scalability, but the problem was people didn't care about the problem they were solving.
Yes.
Or they didn't,
Yes, but even supposing you have your MVP and marketing stuff, suddenly you will need to scale. You need to evolve. And if you're only using less skilled people because you're using a low-code tool, you're doing something wrong. But that reminds me of
you could buy yourself out of that problem. That's the thing.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not a low-code tool problem. It's how you're trying to solve stuff, because you really need to know what's happening under the hood, especially if you're using an abstraction, a higher abstractions. You need to at least understand what this abstraction you're using, a low-code tool or a no-code tool, what is carrying around with you. For example, we used to have a really no-code tool in Brazil. I forgot the name, and luckily I forgot the name. But it was like this. It was using Java. I think it was Maker, the name,
Okay.
Software Maker. I don't remember. It was too long ago, and we were discussing the tool in a forum, and the guys they reached out to us in the forum just telling us, okay, we're using this, we're releasing this software here. I don't remember the context, but the thing is, what the tool did, it just used some diagrams and flow charts, and it uses flow charts to develop Java stuff.
Oh, okay.
But-
So code generation.
Yes, it was code generation,
Yeah.
but it was like not really a code generation, because you're not allowed to see the source code.
Okay.
But internally, it generates source code in Java using public static stuff, so no object orientation. So you can imagine if you need to put something more flexible or building stuff to evolve in your product. Like for example, I need to access this an FTP or something that the tool didn't allow you to do without a customization. But if the tool is producing public static stuff in Java, it's doing it wrong. You're not using object orientation. So it's a problem of the using, like for example, using wrong abstractions to solve a problem that you don't even know what is.
Well, isn't the real problem that you bought the product
Yes.
from this other company? So
No.
the problem was not them. That you should have evaluated it first.
Yes, exactly. But the way some vendors they sell no code or low code too,
Yeah.
it's like okay, even a monkey can do that, but it's not a good selling point. It's not a you're not a. It's like you're eager to do business, then you're just trying to lower your cost. Okay, it's good to lower your cost, but it's not good to lower your cost by hiring people they don't know even how to use a mouse or a keyboard, because that was a selling point. This no code tool here can allow you to write software without any programming language skills. No, this is not how you should sell those stuff. No code tool, I don't believe no code tools are great, but local tools, if you're trying to sell local tools, you should focus on business value and how skilled people can be more productive using
correct.
local
I agree.
tools. Like for example, Camel.
Camel, yeah.
Back in the days, I used to.
So that's also Apache Fuse now,
Yeah,
or part of Fuse.
yeah, it's a part of Fuse. Fuse is a complex product, but what I was saying is, I spent a lot of years in my career building integration, and I'm not the highest skilled guy in integration, but I have some knowledge about it. But when I study Camel, I just look at it and okay, if I knew this tool back in the days when I was starting to build those stuff, man, that would save me a lot of troubles. But because I knew how to do stuff.
But there's a discoverability problem, because if you want to build a system, often there is a solution to your problem, but you have no idea how to find it or how to evaluate the different tools out there. So sometimes it's like some people call it not invented here syndrome, but sometimes it's just quicker just to build it yourself than to go out and look for it on the market.
Yes. For me, the problem is, now that we're having this conversation here, for me, the problem is how people used to buy, or not buy, or using local tools. It's for the wrong reason.
Okay, so what do you think the reason is?
The wrong reason for me is like reducing the cost, hiring less technical people to do the job. So we really need to know what's happening under the hood. Take for example a car. I don't have a car here because they're freaking expensive, but in my home country I used to have a car. But I know the vendors, they use some like devices to attach to your motherboard in your car, and they can tell you, okay, you have a problem in this part of your car. That doesn't make me, but that doesn't make me an expert to be able to find the problem. No, that should be something that only the mechanicals have, because I'm not going to mess up with my car. And it's the same thing applying to the low code or no code tools. It's hard for you to just take a tool that abstracts too much information and lend to someone that doesn't even know how to do
So you're
stuff.
saying the problem is not with low-code tools per se. The issue is that people give a low-code tool to someone who doesn't understand how to solve problems or technical things, and
So-
the combination ends up as a mess.
Yes, and so you have a low code mess to fix.
Yeah.
It's not really a low code tool problem, but maybe it's how people try to solve a problem using the wrong solution.
But okay, what would you say your experience of low code is yourself? Like your best and worst experiences,
Yes, nowadays.
if there's any good ones with
no,
low code.
nowadays, now that we define a low code tool, at least for this episode, we define
What's the
low-code
definition?
tools.
What's the definition?
A low-code tool is like something, a tool that enables you to solve your problem with less code. Just that. If we can like define a low-code tool like as a tool or a platform that gives you an abstraction that you can use to solve a problem with less code, like boilerplate code. You don't need
Okay, no boilerplate.
no
Yeah.
boilerplate code.
Okay.
And if you can like define local tools or this,
In that way, yeah. Okay.
In
yeah,
this way-
I can live with that.
then I have a lot of good experience in local tool. But if I take some other definitions like a visual interface where you can drag and drop stuff and build things like a Lego, it's not going to be as funny as Lego, building Lego stuff, and will probably break. But with that definition, I don't have good experience. But mostly because you don't know how things are how things are like integrating, or how things are going to work under the hood. So it bothers me to not know how this thing here works.
Okay. But you don't know how the operating system is working always, but does that bother you? Or do you know?
Not that much, because I know that every time I need to, I need to understand how this package here is, how my network card is grabbing the packets and get the flow up to my application. I know that I have some like documentations to read about it, and at some point, if you have, and again, if you don't have any means to search, for me, it's not going to work. And that's why I like open source stuff, because it's not that I don't care about how things are supposed to work. It's because I do care that I have the source of information if I need to. There was a time that I was using I don't remember the open source tool. It was a long time ago, maybe Quartz, a scheduling tool. And we were having some problems.
I remember in JBoss,
Yes.
Quartz scheduler.
Yeah, so we were having some problems, and suddenly I realized, okay, this is an open source tool. So grab the damn source code and analyze it and see
Okay.
what's the problem. And the problem was we're forgetting to configure some stuff in the tool. Okay.
But
just fix
if
that.
you look at a company and they're using a product which might consist of 50 different or 100 different open source and NPM packages and Java, Maven packages for Java,
Oh, it's a chaos.
I mean, there's no way that you can expect any company to invest the resources to find out what the problem is.
Yes.
They just don't do it.
Yes, the thing with open source, it's a lot of people, they think that there is no reason to buy open source. But actually, they don't understand we're not buying open source. It's like, for example, in a lot of countries, we're not supposed to take tap water. Like, for example, in Brazil or Latin America. So, but water is free. So why are you buying water if water is free?
You're buying the fact that it's packaged up and clean.
You're not buying the water. You're buying like trust, because you trust this
yeah.
water here.
True.
It's right for drink. It's the same when you're buying open source product. You're not buying product. You're buying trust, because you trust that vendor test the tool, and it works with your hardware.
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
Stuff. So you're buying trust, and that makes sense, and that's why we have now Red Hat making profit, the most profitable company based on open source. Red Hat doesn't sell open source. Red Hat sells trust. So it's not the same when you're comparing to other companies. Like, for example, IBM. It's not that IBM doesn't sell trust. It's because they're not open source. They don't use open source. So
They do have a lot of open source stuff as well, though.
Yeah,
They do.
yeah, they do. But if you're comparing products, so okay, you're not supposed to grab the source code for WebSphere or for WebLogic and just compile it yourself. You don't have access, and it's not good or it's not bad. It's just a fact, because it's not open source. So okay, it's no argue about that. But if you're using something that is open source, you're free to grab the source code. But let's be honest, nobody's going to grab the source code of everything that you put in production. That's why you need to trust somebody.
Yeah, sure.
So going back to the trust stuff, I'm not going to audit the source code of all the Red Hat's portfolio. So that's why we need to trust them.
But is that one of the problems you're saying with low code, as you were seeing it, that
yes, the
that
low
you've
code.
got tools that, and you have to trust a lot of the infrastructure to these tools.
Yes, because if you're using, like, for example, again, if you're using a Java enterprise server like WebSphere or WebLogic or JBoss, they are built on standards, so you can trust they will they will adopt the standards. So you don't
Like
really-
EJB in that case.
yes,
in
EJB
JBoss.
or JMS. If you're using those stuff, you can trust that that is going to work as in the specification. So it's okay. You can easily go to the specification and see how it will work. But if you're adopting something, a local tool that has no standards, how can you be sure that you work as you expect? Because you don't have a standard. So for me, it bothers a lot.
But something like BP, like if you look at PAM, I mean, there's many companies, not just Red Hat, that has BPMN products.
Yes.
But I don't see those products. You don't get normal developers. They don't want to use them. They don't want to, because for them, it's like giving them handcuffs if you ask them to use a low-code tool like that.
Yeah.
And it was the same. I mean, I'm going back in time here in my mind because I'm thinking a lot of this low-code stuff, like you said, it's about abstracting and like the different problems you have. If you go back in time, I mean, I can remember like people trying to encapsulate business stuff. Like Visual Basic was the first system I think that ever encapsulated business logic in a sane way, and there hasn't been anything since. I mean, a lot of people have tried to make components, but they haven't worked. Corba, EJB, and now like SOA and all of this, but it's still not really components. It's still, if you're doing SOA or this, or newer techniques, you're talking to a specific API. It's not like a standard of APIs.
Yes, the standard was just the internals, and maybe that's what went wrong with SOA.
But we're having the same thing now with the new stuff. I mean, it's JavaScript based and JSON, but we still don't have. There's still no real standards. In fact, we talked about this in API management.
Yeah, but for JavaScript we have the ECMAScript now. It's a standard for JavaScript.
But for me, I think like the reason that low-code platforms I think are important is going back to the time of Visual Basic, because you're right. If we can get a standard way of business components to talk to other business components, like in JavaScript, the closest thing we have is NPM. So if you want to make something, you just pull in a package from the NPM repository, and you can reuse a lot of functionality. And Java has Maven, I suppose, but Maven was never ever, I think, used as much as NPM is. I don't know what you think.
I don't know, because I haven't compared those, but I can say if you're using Maven, then you're downloading half of the internet, and if you're using NPM, you're downloading the other half of the internet. So it's the things that come with the package are really, really, really heavy.
But storage is cheap. I mean, if it's fast,
Yeah.
the companies don't like.
Yeah, but if you think about
Why should they care?
if you're building images in containers, and if you're passing containers to a lot of nodes inside of a cluster, then 10, 15, 20 megabytes, they count a lot, because
But
you're
that's-
dealing with network.
But that's where we get to things like Quarkus again. Your favorite
Yes.
Java.
Yes, my favorite Java framework now, it's Quarkus. The thing is, Quarkus, it's not Quarkus is not the hero, the only hero here. It's one of the heroes. The other hero is the GraalVM. If we start to think back in the days, when Java was born, there wasn't no concept of the cloud. Cloud was just something you saw up in the sky. It wasn't like someone else's computer running in I don't care where. But nowadays we have this cloud concept, and Java was a tool that wasn't born to solve cloud stuff, because cloud didn't exist. And now that we produce Java applications packed in a fat jar, they used to call 200 megabytes. and I need to spin up a container, 200 megabytes inside a container that leads easily to 300 megabytes of container, and I need to spin up into like 10 nodes in my data center. So it'll be 300 megabytes being downloaded by 10 nodes. It'll take some time, and probably it's going to like cause some issues in my network, because now the problem is to how can I scale this? And if you follow, I can't say cloud native apps are standards in a way that I standardize it and documented way, but it's the industry now has some ways to do cloud native apps. And if you follow the cloud native guidelines, you can easily produce some light container image that you can easily spin up to a lot of people. If you remember those days, floppy disks, if you need to install CorelDRAW 1, how many floppy disks you need? Like 15. And if you need to pass those floppy disks to a lot of people, you have 15 floppy disks. So, okay, here's your ton of floppy disk, here's your ton of floppy disk. And okay, now we have a pen drive that can hold tons of gigabytes and maybe terabytes now. I think we have terabytes pen drives now. Storage is again, it's cheap for us. But if you think like for a network, it's not that easy to just pack more stuff into the same channel and pass to a lot of machines. No, it's if you're using your network to pass a lot of images, heavy images, you have more time until your application is ready to receive requests. And in a cloud way, you have to count this.
Okay, but I guess we're talking about. Okay, I know this discussion was low
yes,
code.
we're getting a bit.
But
far
okay,
from
so there's two things. So, if you have a highly scalable system and you have to have many different, like your Facebook, or if you're even or Netflix, or even if you're just if you're a telecoms company, low code doesn't make sense because you have to care about scale and efficiency. But I think if you're a smaller company and you have maybe 100 people using your system, low code could make sense because it's a lot more heavyweight on your network infrastructure and stuff like that. Does that make sense to have this division here?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Because we're IT people, and we're saying is low code good or bad? We should never talk in absolutes. It's really different types of problems have different solutions, and low code is like you wouldn't see like Facebook using Apex or PAM to develop Facebook.com. They're going to be down to the metal.
Because they need to.
It's a different thing. Or Google, they're not.
Those are just. We have this space here where scalability matters, and we have this far away space where you can put Twitter and Google and Facebook. The problems those gigantic leaders they have are not the same problems our normal people or normal enterprise they will have. But the thing is judging, because I think I'm going too far away from the topic here, but the thing is local tools should be used. But if you're trying to use local tools, and that's my final thought for this, if you're using local tools to hire less skilled people, you're using wrong.
Oh, okay, yeah. If you're doing it because you think it's just...
Yes, because it's going to lower your cost. It might lower your cost here to develop your software, but for the maintenance, it to be easily 70% of the life cycle of your application.
I think maintenance is 99%.
Yes, probably. And it's not going to help having less skilled people.
Yeah.
So you really need to have skilled people to know how to fix problems, because with tons of technology arising, and by now we have more in this talk here, maybe 150 new Java frameworks, JavaScript frameworks now when you start talking, because man, things can blow up easy. And if you think about, I'm an expert in the XPTO framework. No, we need to be expert in problem solving.
Yeah, correct. But that's an issue, is when people have to make a technology decision. I mean, low code becomes a marketing thing to say this takes away your because you have a pain, and that is I want to develop something, and this is like the pill. It's like low code solves
low code.
Yeah, this, you know, because you don't have to have coders coding. This is low code.
Yes.
And people put that as low cost.
Yes, low cost, exactly. It's not a low code tool, it's a low cost tool. Fantastic.
Yeah, low code.
fantastic.
Low code might not be low cost.
Exactly.
It might, yeah.
Exactly. Because you're trying to solve a problem using the wrong solution. So it's not going to solve your problem.
I think a company needs to, or whoever the problem is, people need to understand what is that
Yes.
actual problem. Because I've heard a lot of people actually try and solve really complicated problems, and sometimes say, "Oh, it's fine. I can use Zapier. I can use if this then that," and I've like played it in my head, and I've thought, "Wow, if you do that, it's going to look really terrible to the end user." And it's going to be so slow that it's going to take forever to do what should take like a tenth of a second.
Yes, you're solving a problem by creating 10 other problems. So you're not solving anything.
You're right. We're problem solvers, actually.
Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think I think it convinced me that the problem, it's not low code tools, it's low cost tools. I love this term here.